Hey, Laura.
Hey.
Hello.
Laura.
Hey.
Thank you for joining us. So this is Laura Huerta Migus. We are, as Seth mentioned, we have a drinking about diversity or equity happy hour. So essentially, it's time to enjoy some cocktails if you're into that. Otherwise, if not, water, Coke, whatever you want. And then we're going to ask Laura a bunch of questions. We have a list of questions as prepared, but if you are an audience member, if you're watching and you would like to ask questions, this is basically an open Q&A format. So, Seth, is there anything else or anyone else I'm missing?
No, I don't think so. I did want to say thank you to Laura. Right, we had her on the podcast a couple of months ago, and diversity inclusion has been a kind of a major theme this year, like across the cultural landscape. So it's very interesting to talk about it from a tech-centric perspective. But I do think we got a lot of good questions in there, and yeah, I mean, maybe we just launch straight into it. I mean, Laura, unless you have anything, to kind of kick things off, we could just start with some of those questions.
No, I don't think so. I think it's supposed to be as fast and loose as we want to make it. I've got my and it's only an adult beverage because I'm drinking it, but I will have a real adult beverage brought to me at some point. So
yeah, come on. Where's Adam? He should be.
He's slow.
Yeah.
I've already sent a request.
He needs to come say hi.
He'll make an appearance shortly. But I guess maybe what I wanted to say is the reason we wanted to call this our, drinking about diversity is that I've been doing this work for a long, long time, and the best conversations that I've had for myself to learn and really ask real questions have been when we've been at conferences or, with colleagues or other people, at the bar having a drink and just really asking questions and feeling like we can really have a conversation, even when it's a weird and uncomfortable one.
Yeah.
And so that's the space that we want to try to make today.
Hey, we will do our best to recreate it. I know, so far I don't know who's already been having a few sips of those adult beverages, but we will get there.
That's right. Yeah, I'll be with you soon. Okay. So how do we want to get started? Do you want me to pick questions, or do y'all want to pick questions?
I can pick question. I can pick how about we each pick a question? I'll pick one of mine first, of course.
Yeah, so your presence has been requested.
I was watching.
Well, come and say hi.
Bring her an adult beverage, Adam.
Hey, Adam. Hey, Adam.
I'll go back to watch.
Yeah. Okay.
Good man. So one of mine was, what are common misconceptions of diversity and inclusion?
Oh, such a good question.
Thank you.
I'll be here all night. I have all the drinks. So I think some the biggest misconception that I think does makes a lot of this work seem either pointless or overwhelming sometimes is the idea that there's a right answer. We know a lot of what's not as right or what we think about as being wrong now in terms of diversity and inclusion, what we're supposed to be unlearning. But what we're supposed to learn and what is right, there's a sense that there is an answer out there. And the truth is that it's still emerging. Like, if we knew the answers, we wouldn't have to do this work. And so I think that especially as you're thinking about yourselves in the workplace, because it's often presented to you as training, right? And you have to take quizzes and you're graded and you have to pass. It really creates this paradigm, this assumption that there actually is A+ diversity and inclusion knowledge. And the reality is that that's not the way that I think that's foolish. And I think it makes it a no-win, actually, for everybody, because this is really about how do you get a grade in being open-minded, right? That it's like a constant. So I'd say that's the biggest misconception, is that there is a binary right and wrong. That simply when we're talking about any of this.
Interesting. So if there's no right and wrong, what you're saying is there's a scale, and on that scale, or a spectrum rather, and on that spectrum, there has to be a point at which, though, that
Yeah.
you are kind of failing on that spectrum. There has to be a point at which it's like, okay, you're not doing a great job.
I'd say that if there's a wrong mindset, it's one that is not being able to understand that there actually are other points of view. So the thing about inclusion work is that it's about creating culture, right? And so who determines how culture is made? Like, that's not how culture happens. It's that a bunch of people get together and figure out a way to be together, and then they decide what's right. And then that keeps changing depending on what their world looks like. So it's sort of constantly being negotiated. So I think the only wrong attitude is the one that says it can't change. That's the wrong attitude. Because we're just always the one that refuses to learn. And then the other thing about the binary is that there can be some right and wrong, say, with a particular perspective. Like, I think we can agree that it's wrong. It's not right, or it's not right. It's not right that people might be limited from, participating in this work because they have a visual impairment. We're at a place in technology right now that honestly, that shouldn't be an issue, but it is, right? Now, are you personally wrong for not being a part of the solution or not knowing that? No, that's about learning. Why is it, why it is and why it isn't. And so we can sort of pull it apart all the time, depending on what frame of reference we're thinking about. But it's really about being able to, the only wrongness is being like, I just can't. It just needs to be this way. Sometimes it has to be that way. Yeah. And I guess it's like, I think about, talking with Adam or listening to Adam about, code and thinking about products, right? That sometimes you want the magic bullet where you have these pieces of code or something that you're doing that will last forever. But that's not reality, right? You always have to be adapting, improving, assessing. You should be, if it will be a good product, right? So
yes,
this work is exactly the same. This work's exactly the same.
You start with an MVP, just the most simple, basic version of something, and then slowly iterate upon it. It's basically what.
Yeah.
If I can summarize. Yeah, it sounds like a lean startup version of diversity and inclusion. Here, let me add Dave back in. There we go.
Yeah.
David, what's going on, man? What's up with your connection?
Every time something changes, where someone comes in or goes out, StreamYard just freezes. I don't know what's going on.
So
but
sorry.
I can ask the next question since I'm talking.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, Laura, first, thanks for joining us. This is awesome. Yeah. As a hiring leader for what I would consider really technical security roles, the struggle getting any resumes is real, right? So, I mean, I bet you for every role that's open, we get 5 to 10 resumes.
Yeah.
How can, someone like me ensure that, I get resumes from a much more diverse group when traditionally, I'm getting very, very few resumes at all?
It's such a good question. So I don't want this to sound like punting, but I want to take a step back because I think one of the challenges with your question, I talked about at the very beginning, sometimes it feels overwhelming for us as an individual. And in our last talk, we were talking about any ism, whether it's, racism or sexism or ageism or ableism, whatever, all these things, the real way we need to think about them is as systematic. They're cultural things that happen. So I think about that challenge like as a hiring manager. So you're a person, right? And you have like a pretty small sort of locus of control over the recruitment process, your hiring process, right? From recruitment to hiring. And so my big question, if I were as a hiring manager, and I have been a hiring manager in separate spaces, that I always have to ask myself, number one, why? What's happening in this bigger world that I have such a small pool of resumes? And if we think that diversity, then let's pick that it's racial and gender diversity, because I know that those are two very prevalent dimensions of diversity that we're really talking about in the tech field. There are many others, and that's sort of what's present. My question would be like, why? So why is this pool so small? And, the answer you'll get back is that, it's just there are so few that have what it takes to, to get through it. But the realities is that there are probably some real structural barriers, right? So, that you have to probably have certain certifications. And how do you get those certifications? Do you do them out of your own pocket? Do you usually have to have it from a previous employer? And that assumes that you get hired by an employee, you get hired from whatever university that you've been recruited from, and da 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 da. So there's a pipeline that's actually set up for just one kind of person. So as a hiring manager, one of the things that I would think about are there little ways that I can maybe expand the system? So if I know that there's a particular certification, or let's just say a certification that really is sort of the kind of free pass, right, into qualification, my question would be to my HR department or whoever, say, look, if we want to widen our pool of talent, I need to be able to pick somebody that I think I can grow and we could support pursuing a certification. Right? Because then that lets you, as a hiring manager, pick the person that you think is going to be right for your team. Like if you need a new point of view and your company is going to get a person who's going to have the qualifications, right? And that has the talent, and you build in all kinds of things to make sure that that person performs, right? You still have 90-day reviews, you have these things. But I think what happens a lot when you get into highly specific fields, so yours happens to be a certain kind of technical field. I work in the museum field. That is also a very niche industry. It's a very niche industry with a problematic pipeline. So, but what I've seen, and in our community, for example, becoming a curator is a very narrow job path. You have to have a graduate degree to enter as an entry-level curator. So who can do that? Well, people with money.
Yeah. I mean, we've definitely started removing college degrees as a requirement, because frankly, I don't care if you have a college degree. Yeah. And I think that's helped at least garner more resumes. So I guess, little things like that, but and we're working really hard to make sure that the job descriptions get out to the different communities, because, you throw them on one job board, that's probably not enough.
Yeah, I think Laura's point is so salient when you talk about bigger companies, right? Because David, at contrast, it's a decent size, but it's not like a giant enterprise, right? And all of us have worked at mid-size, small consultancies or companies, but like when you get into that large space, like you really do have to be very specific with HR, because they'll put some crazy requirements on there where you can't even find regular ABSEC people, for instance, with those requirements, let alone opening that up to a wider pool of candidates. So
yeah, and there are things like personal connections. So when you're looking, there's a niche group for everywhere, for everything. And they may not look like your specific, the right fit, but often you just sort of have to throw things out. And so there are affinity groups out there that are, on different social platforms, not just LinkedIn, but also Facebook groups. And there are, especially in the space that you all are in the tech community, there are more and more nonprofits that are doing this work of cultivating a prepared workforce. So one organization that I feel like it's not directly applicable to your content, but I know they're interested in expanding the work they're doing, is called Climb Hire. And it's founded by a friend of mine, and they've started booting up and they're getting folks Salesforce certified. And really it's about moving working parents from service level jobs into living wage jobs. And, they're highly vetted, they're highly supported, and, they're getting them that kind of support, and it's transformative, right? And you want those people who are basically willing to do this at night school and excel. Those are the kinds of people you want to hire, So, but yes, to your point, earlier, the bigger the system is that you're working in as a hiring manager, the harder it is to transform the system. But there are often loopholes, like those systems are also leaky, and we can take advantage of that too.
Yeah, I mean, it gets a little weird too with pay scales, as well. So that's always kind of a weird one too, is, some companies have weird requirements on positions for pay scales that are, again, large, massive, but yeah, that's amazing. Who wants to choose their own next question?
Yeah.
Ben.
I picked Ben. Yep.
All right, let me get to the other screen. So this is going to sound really bad, but is there a way to improve the culture when HR violations are treated as a joke?
I saw this one and I was feeling this one very deeply. Like, phew. I think that there are, and one of I probably should have said this earlier about sort of myths about this work. And I don't think it's a myth. I actually think that it's a bit of a tragedy that so much of diversity and inclusion work is framed as avoiding HR violations. It's all really framed as transgression. In the workplace, it's in a very just punitive frame. And I think that's done, that's probably done as much damage to our advancing in this arena as anything else. Anyway, so I think that, and I've seen it actually, again, coming from an industry that doesn't actually have very strong HR practice, just in really different ways, that if we can think about culture in really different ways, and how a strong culture self-polices. So when I used to do this work in more corporate environments, and we talk about metrics for D&I, there is a way of thinking that says if you're doing it right, you actually don't need an internal ombudsman. Like you don't need the person who's adjudicating HR violations, because what you've created through activities like that are really social, like affinity groups, like really employee driven and employee led education groups, affinity groups, even what we would call, you wouldn't call them in this necessarily in a workplace, but these sort of truth and reconciliation groups. So that when it's almost like, you know how you have peer mentors in high school? So you don't go to the principal. It's a solid concept for all, for your entire lifespan. And there are some organizations that have really empowered their employees so that their D&I work actually isn't so much related to HR in terms of EEO violations, but it's about being a great place to work. You know, so how do you empower your staff to create the environment that everybody wants to be in and that everybody is held accountable for? So, you know, that looks like giving time to people to be on these groups, paid time. You know, if you're going to be in a LGBTQ support, you know, affinity group that's going to do work for your employees. And when people are doing that programming themselves and it's not just coming out from HR, I've really seen that be super successful.
Do you worry about taking it maybe too far then? And so you have these, it's the equivalent of a security champion, but maybe like a diversity champion who would say, you know, that thing that you said or the thing that you did, somebody else might feel that it's inappropriate or feel uncomfortable in how you handle the situation. I mean, do you worry that then you end up with people acting on others' behalf and trying to, you know, I don't want to say feel good about it, but like take it too far, or, you know, when there really wasn't a situation to begin with?
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's, it's so, it's such a fine line, like, or a very nuanced approach to how to build culture. And there are, there's a whole field that's dedicated to this. It's what I have my master's in organizational development. When it's done right, is really about not just around D&I, but how are you creating some base cultural norms, some base training and expectations for people about how we talk to each other. Like, I will say that that's something that Adam and I talk about all the time. I might have mentioned it in the last conversation, that sometimes I witness these conversations and I'm like, wow, that is not how people talk to each other. You know, like I would not let my son talk to another 6-year-old that way. That is not, you know, that's not professional conversation. And so I think that there's some internal and deep opportunities for that kind of reflection in this community. I know. Yeah. Someone's going to jump in.
Well, yeah. So I want to make a hard question harder.
Yeah.
So what happens in the case that this is occurring from the very top down, right? Is there recourse other than just obviously leaving the company? Is there recourse that you can take outside of that?
I mean, I think there are the general protections that we have. It's actually, so the challenge that you have in the marketplace of the United States, right? And I'm just assuming, I'm speaking from that perspective. That's where I am. That's what I understand. Is that unfortunately, or whatever, the way that our system works is that you vote with your feet, right? That's the way that a market system works. And that's how our system works. And so it's really tough to create change because our cultural tools in the larger US culture is leaving and suing people.
Yeah.
We don't have a mediation culture. You know, if we were living in Sweden or in France or, you know, in a lot of other countries, they have a whole system of mediation. Like, and that's just available. Like, you can call for mediation, and that's just a thing that exists. We don't have that, and it makes it so hard. That's why we live in this binary, right? Because you're like, you're in or you're out, or I'm in or I'm suing you. And that's just the bigger pot that we're like swimming in here. So it makes it super hard.
So Laura, how do we address that? Because, you know, I think it feels like the only recourse that I've seen, you know, we see it in the news and Google and some of the issues that they've had is someone gets fired, they come write some blog, and then it's across the media. But like, they've already been pretty much destroyed because they've lost their job and now they're looking for something else. Like, there's got to be some way to fix that massive problem.
Yeah, I think that there are, and so I think to me, it's a leadership conversation, and not just formal leadership, like who's your CEO and COO. There are multiple kinds of leadership in a professional environment. So there are people who have positional leadership, like they're the CEO, they have a title. And then there is social leadership. And we all have the affinity to have social leaders. Like, you know who in your teams are the influencers, right? You know who in your team the influencers are, whether it's about the technical work or the social dynamics of teams or management or any of these things. And so that is really the way that I think that when I see some of these especially from your industry, like the high profile firings that happen, and the way that it comes back is that, so where this is not shifting blame, and this is related to another question that's on the this about sort of hiring a chief diversity officer and so many other things. I see that as sort of a failure to develop social capital within your organization. So think about the people who never get fired.
Yeah.
That should be fired. You know who they are. We won't name them. But they have a social network, right? They have built a social network of protection around them. There is no reason that can't happen around issues of inclusion, right? If we make that something that's a priority. And that's part of when you hear about being an ally, et cetera, is how do you sort of create your gang around that? And there are, I'm going to actually send this link in the chat. There's a great framework that I love for this that comes from Bill Moyers, and he identifies these like 4 roles of social change. So like, what are you called to? So some people are like the protest people, right? Some people are the protest people. Some people are the behind the scenes, like negotiators. Some people create the group, and some people want to make the change, right? They want to go out and you need all of those. So as I think about like, how do you make those change? Like, think about which one of those superpowers you have and how do you find the other people? So it's all about creating network, right? Even our civil rights movement was all about creating networks, a network that was big enough, right, to withstand some attack and threat, but change got made. Like the Civil Rights Act got passed. Like, these things get passed because it's all been done through social means. Even the ADA, you know how the Americans with Disabilities Act got passed? Because they found the disability lobby found 4 Congress people who had relatives with disabilities and made them the champions. And that's how the ADA got passed. Not because we all said, oh, people with disabilities should have rights in this country. That's not how it happened. It happened through social influence. And that's how it has to happen in our workplaces too, really.
So Laura, like along those lines, right? Like my question was related to, coming outside an organization, right? Like I'm in a very small, like niche consultancy. Like we deal with a lot of different teams, and I see diverse teams. I see teams that are not diverse. And so like you kind of already answered that question, right? Is finding that gang, finding that group to help instantiate some sort of change. But is there a way to kind of recognize who's ready for that, or I have a hard time with it, right? Because I hear things on like calls with clients, right? Like this directly affects my bottom line, and I'm like, man, if I call this out, this could, it could go one of two ways, right? Like there's no kind of middle ground when it comes to talking about, hey, that's an inappropriate thing to say. So how do you recognize that?
So, I think another sip of a drink is going to help answer that.
Okay. And then we can get to the chief diversity officer and the other, right?
Okay, I'm going to put my this might be a bit of an unpopular opinion, but I'm also very pragmatic about a lot of this stuff. And so I think we have to recognize that in part of the skill that we build in trying to negotiate all this is we also build a skill in calculating risk and reward. Mm-hmm. We do, all of us. If you're a straight middle-aged white guy, if you are a queer woman of color, our calculus is different on the risk and reward, but there's a risk and reward always. And so when I'm in situations, like you're just talking about, Seth, that you're working with a client and somebody says something off color, I have this calculation of how mad do I have, like how mad am I and how mad am I willing to make them, or embarrassed, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Or do I need to say it now? Yeah. So I think that there's.
Yeah, I was just going to say, because it's one thing when it's like a one-on-one conversation and it's like, I'm not responsive to whatever it is that they happen to say, but it's another when it's like this, a big group call and you've got, 20 people on the call, everybody from their a CEO or whatever down, or marketing officer, and to call someone out on in that sort of a situation.
Yeah, my favorite response, like canned responses or approach to those kinds of things. And this is if it's your colleagues, if it's a client, that I've said is like, oh, I didn't really understand what you said. Could you say that again? So, because what we're trying to do in this work is gain self-awareness. Mm-hmm. And look, 99% of people's intentions when they say crazy things or believe what I think are crazy things are actually not malicious. So much of it comes from ignorance, and I don't mean that in a detrimental way. I really mean that as not knowing. Like just their whole world, in their whole world experience, that's an okay thing to think and say. Yeah. And nobody has ever said to them, could you say that again? Because I didn't understand what you meant.
Yeah. Yeah. What did you really mean by that? Right. That's it.
I don't understand. So I don't understand what that meant. Could you say it again? Yeah. And, it's a very powerful tool to use when you say that. But again, depending on who you are and what like your situation is, like, are you going to say that in the middle of a tense client, back and forth, and when you think you might jeopardize your relationship? Probably not. But that person's probably going to say it again in a less fraught situation.
You're right. You're right. Yeah, it's probably going to come up in other ways.
Yeah.
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 That's good. I like that, right? Like I really do that. I mean, that gives me something concrete to actually like latch onto, which is what I appreciate. There was and I know Dula hasn't had an opportunity to ask his question, but there was a good one that popped up in the chat. I don't know if you saw that. Yeah.
No, I think the one in the chat, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just going to put it up, right?
That's great.
So intern who did a great job, wanted to get her into an InfoSec position. And her response was, there are too many guys in this industry. No thanks. Right?
Yeah. So, what do you recommend as a response to that? I think a really powerful thing to do is to ask questions and to ask, because there's a lot that's packed into that response.
Yes.
So one of the most supportive things that you can do, this was a woman talking about too many guys. You'd very likely hear the same thing from a person of color saying like, there's too many white people here.
Yeah.
And so what you can ask is, so what, can you tell me more about what that experience has been like for you? Because I'd like to help you if I can. Because what that gives the person the right to say is, I got treated like this and I didn't like it. I don't understand why this happened. Like, I didn't like this. I don't understand. This is what scares me. This is what I'm unsure of. Right? Because when you are an only or one of the few in a situation, I talk about culture, is that you often are threatened or don't understand what's going on and where you fit in it. And if you'll like it or if it's safe for you. And so when you are in a position of power, Eric, like you having an intern, that's a great opportunity to say, okay, wow, that sounds like you had some bad experiences. Can you tell me about that? And even if that person, your intern, doesn't decide to pursue it, that is awareness that you get to have as somebody who's had power, right? So when you get your next female intern, you have some grounding about what happened to your last female intern that pushed that person out, and how can you create better space for the next person, or maybe be aware of some dynamics that maybe you didn't understand how that were there, or how that affected them before.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense, right? Just this, again, it goes back to that kind of iterative approach, right? Hey, we know that we failed with, this intern, like, let's make it better for the next one, or whoever else is coming in after the fact. Like, I always think back to early days of DEF CON, down in Las Vegas. And I mean, the whole culture there, and, how, I mean, honestly, like Dave, even, Ken, the first couple of years that you guys went, it was so, young, middle-aged, white guy, college party-ish atmosphere, drinking and everything that goes on in Vegas. And it's changed, right?
Dude, it was just white dudes with black shirts, tan cargo pants, and BO, and that's it.
Yeah.
Sorry about the BO part, hackers.
Yeah, but now that I think about it, now there's like DEF CON's doing all of this with safe spaces, and I know hackers that are women that are bringing their kids along for roots, and it's just like a more inclusive, and they've worked really hard at making spaces for everyone to feel safe and to have a place to go. And I think again, it's part of that. Hey, there was a couple of them that built a gang and said, this isn't okay, and we want a space, and we want to be here too, because we have a right to be here. And we made space for them, right? So I do feel like the industry is making progress, but there's still a long way to go.
There's such a long way to go all over the place. And I see Eric's following up, and like she had those are super traumatic experiences. Like I don't know if somebody is here is old enough, maybe if they ever watched Waiting to Exhale and Angela Bassett putting the fire on the car and walking away. Yes, like if that's been your experience, why subject yourself to it? You know, again, what's the risk reward? Is this money worth what I personally have to endure? Absolutely not. You know, and I think these are the things that get exposed. You know, unfortunately, what happens when you're and this is human nature. It doesn't make it any less wrong, you know, poor behavior. But like human beings tend to gang up on people that are different than them when you have sameness. This is monkey brain that we have. It's not a great part of ourselves, but it's a thing that happens. And so part of this work is being open to hearing what happens to an other when they walk in and what their experience is, and especially when they've had a bad one, and being able to say, wow, I believe you. Like, wow, I believe that happened to you. Do I think everybody's like that? No, but I believe that happened, and wow, we have really got to figure out how to keep that from happening. That's just not okay. It's just not okay.
Yeah, it really isn't. So, well, you know, but at least it's getting better, right? Like,
it's growth. You know, it's growth, and
yeah, I know we talked about it before. It's hard, right? Like, it's not going to happen naturally unless we actually confront it. So,
yeah.
Yeah. And I know we only have a couple of minutes left. Like, we want to be cognizant of your time, right? Like, as we, you know, continue the slow descent into our happy hour. But I think Dula was the last one. Dula, do you have a question that you wanted to ask?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, my question, well, I had two. The other one was the chief diversity officer question. But the other question that I had was, so as a manager or a team lead, how can you ensure that at the team level? So we talked about hiring and we talked about company or organization wide. So let's, you know, we shrink it down a little bit to at the team level. How can you ensure that your team is being inclusive and kind of creating a safe space for everyone on the team?
Oh, you know, managers are so powerful. I hope that everybody knows that managers, like that idea, that influencing layer, managers make or break a company's culture. That's it. There's a whole body of work on this. Managers are really the stewards of a whole company's culture. So you have a lot of power, right? Because as a manager, you're the one who is receiving information from maybe up high, if you will, and you are translating that information down to your team. So you are a critical culture maker in your environment. Now that superpower can be used for evil as much as it can be used for good. But if we're assuming good here and around inclusion, the number one characteristic of a great manager is asking yourself every day, are you getting your team members what they need to excel in their performance? And that may be, you know, practical things like tools and, you know, the right office environment and other things. But it also means, do they have access to you? Do they have the right support and access to you, both for support on, you know, the technical or whatever the, you know, the body of their work is, as well as feeling supported by you as a person? Now, this doesn't mean that you need to be best friends, but are you aware of their life outside of work and how it might affect them? Are you creating a team environment where within your team you have cohesion as opposed to intra-team competition? Right? Is there a mutual support network there? because the way that happens is that people want are they invested in each other's work being great? That's the number one piece. And do they know each other enough? Are you helping them are you holding the expectation for them to foster relationships so that they know each other well enough to be invested in each other's great work? And again, that doesn't mean that they have to be best friends. It can even just be, do they know each other's work styles enough, and can they respect it or negotiate those enough? So we have the people that are super deadline driven and want to do everything before the deadline. Then you have normal people like me who have deadlines and do them 24 hours after the deadline. And, is there an environment in which they're like, all right, I'm going to give that person a deadline 2 days ahead because I know they're going to be a day late? Because we're managing each other as people. I'd say that when we do all this diversity and inclusion stuff, what it comes down to is, can we accommodate each other as people to get the work done? Not my way, but in the best way, which is everybody being able to do their best.
I felt that, Laura. So hard. Note to self, start making deadlines 2 days ahead of when they're needed.
It's 100%. I do this. I've had my team together for a little over 6 years. They are all completely different and honestly had been at odds with each other. And as a manager, as the top leader, what I had to lay down as a mandate is, you don't have to like each other, and I don't care how you do it. But the bottom line is, I expect you to work together. And if you can't figure it out, I'll help you. But you don't win. Like, nobody wins. Like, I am not into who's winning and who's losing, because if we're doing that, we've all lost. Because that's the whole point of a company. Right? You're a unit in a system that's working to produce things efficiently.
I think that's oh, sorry. Go ahead, David.
I would say I always tell my staff, I hire people to tell me what to do. I don't want it done my way. I hire smart people to tell me what to do. That's it. Period.
Yeah. And they should know. Like, I have one person who works for me who, oh my gosh, I could not be her. I could not be her. I could not be in her existence. But she's my grant writer. And every single one of those things, that drives me nuts about her. And I know that things about me that drive her nuts about me. But, she bats 900 in our grant proposals. And you know what I couldn't do? That. But she can, because of the things that drive me nuts. And so we're going to do that, and sometimes people are going to come from a different cultural background. They're going to need to talk to you for 45 minutes before they get to their question. Okay. Because they're building a relationship, and it's worth it, because then they're going to get what they need from you. And then they're going to go off and do their work. And there are other people who can't deal with it. And sometimes you just have to give them their thing, and you have to be unsatisfied. So we're in relationship with each other. And when you decide to be in relationship with people, it's easy to be inclusive, because relationship is about being with each other, I'm seeing a lot, of these, conversations in the comments about incentives to change and people enjoying themselves. Why are they motivated to change? I actually think that as a leader, as somebody who is a top leader in my organization, there are actually some really basic and powerful tools, and they're larger accountability tools. Again, the point of your company or whatever you're doing is to maximize your output. And whether that doesn't have to be by volume, it can be by quality. But I think when we think about a balance of quality and volume, what you really need is the quality of relationship. Like if we think about the stories of not just tech corporations, but American corporations that are iconic, and you look at the management literature on them and their stories, it's about relationships. They have leaders that have built great relationships, and they've also been very diverse. IBM, back in the big blue days, they had one of the most diverse tech workforces in the country, and they did it on purpose. That's how they achieved that greatness. So we have models for this.
Yeah, and I mean, I'd like to, because so I'd like to add one thing too, because I know I've heard the argument for having remote employees. One of the big arguments is you're not limited to a tiny, small geographic location for your pool of employees, and you can cast a wider net in terms of the talent you can bring on. The same holds true, speaking as a white male who has, among these other males on the podcast, twice now asked Laura to come on. I can tell you that the same holds true for gender, sexual preference, religious preference, 100%. For anything else. It all holds true. So you're casting a wider net. And I, to Ben's point about groupthink, it's exactly that, right? Like we don't want to all be on thinking, coming from the same perspective with the same points. It's useless. In fact, I'd argue that you need to argue a little bit too. I think you need to have some differing opinions in a respectful way. But anyways.
Yeah. Well, and even from a very basic perspective, in the work that you all do, just that idea, it's in any industry, we do the thing we do because we've done it this way, because we did it this way, because we've always done it this way, leads to inevitable degradation of your work. That's it. That's physics. That's physics. So I think as folks that are think about themselves as being technically and scientifically minded, right? What are the healthiest ecosystems? There are ones, they are diverse and they are always in tension. Like diverse ecosystems the stability is not peaceful. That stability is about a constant balancing act. Where things live, some things thrive, some things die. Things are always moving, but the energy in that system is what stays stable, not the details of it.
Great point. I mean, this is, we said it last time, Seth. We were like, man, we could have Laura on for hours, and it holds true again. Once again, I just feel like this conversation. I mean,
we're already over time on what we had allotted for it, and it feels like we're just starting the conversation.
Just because everybody's starting to kick
I'm getting to the bottom of my drink and starting to make metaphors. So it's probably a good time to.
Yeah. It's a tough topic, it's a tough topic. And again, speaking from a white male perspective, there's always a little bit of like, should I be the one? But when I covered this in the first time we spoke, yeah, absolutely. You have to be, it has to, and you covered it tonight. It has to be a vast amount of people sort of like, or the right people in positions to sort of like, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of push forward, these types of initiatives, agendas, whatever you want to call it. But thank you so much. I mean, we have other questions. We have things we could talk about. Seth, at this point, should we start wrapping it up, saying our thanks and all of that? Yeah. I'm not really sure how to end it on this beautiful night too.
Yeah. So maybe,
down, admittedly.
Yeah. So maybe we give Laura just like, a final say, and we'll say goodbye to her, and then we'll wrap up the conference from there.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Wow.
Laura, any final thoughts? Right?
Yeah. No pressure.
No pressure. Yeah. It better be good, because it's going to be like tweeted and,
Okay. So I think just because and you can never end this conversation, and it can feel sometimes unsatisfying. Just a couple of things that I really am thinking about right now, like as me as a person who does this work and helps other people with this work, that I think is important in this moment that we find ourselves in the world, is maybe the most important thing you can do is really get clear about, like, what's your locus of control? Like, what's the sphere that you can make some change in? Clarify that for yourself, and then own it. Be okay with that, even if it feels small. Even if it feels small, it's okay, because you get to own that territory for making change, even if that locus of control is just your own awareness. That's worth it. It will make a difference, because cumulatively, if we're all doing that and committing to our locus of control, that's what helps us make a difference. So, I mean, I'll leave it with that.
Great. Yeah, well said. Good summary. Laura, every time you come on, it just spurs all sorts of good things, right? Like, I mean, personally, right, like some growth and some like recognitions and things that I know I can do better. So I really appreciate it. And I appreciate you taking the time and being willing to come talk to us about it.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for accepting the invitation to drink about it.
Cheers.
It's been really a pleasure to see you all and meet new friends.
Yes.
Cheers.
Yes. Cheers. Cheers. Thanks,
Cheers to
Laura.
everyone.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you so
That's
much,
great.
Laura.
Thank
So
you.
much.
Cheers.
Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thanks.